You know the feeling. You're all revved up and ready for a MIDI maze LAN party when you realise that you don't have the game installed on your ST. Now, what's a boy to do? Well, we could fall back on good old-fashioned sneakernet to transfer the files, but where's the fun in that? There are two basic approaches for ST to ST file transfer, and of course, other more esoteric ones exist. So the two simple methods are serial port transfer and, well, based off the title of this video, you probably guessed it, MIDI. So why did I choose MIDI over serial? Both of these solutions require buying or building cables. Serial data transfer requires one special purpose cable. That's called a null modem cable, which is really only useful for one thing, and that's data transfer. MIDI operation requires two cables. But unlike serial, these cables are useful for more than just data transfer. You can control synthesizers, drum machines, edit patches, sync with SMPTE, and much, much more. Extra equipment may be required. The other aspect of this is data transfer speed. The ST line of computers had a maximum serial port baud rate of 19,200 bits per second. Now, while hardware hacks were available to take this up to 38,400, that required you to be soldering iron and bodge wire savvy, and it was not for the faint-hearted. MIDI, on the other hand, is an industry standard. It runs at 31,250 bits per second, stock, so no soldering required. Plus, of course, you can play multi-user MIDI maze. Hey, that's what it was all about back then. So speed-wise, MIDI running 31,250 bps, the protocol specifies one start bit, 8 data bits, and a stop bit, yielding a maximum bandwidth of 3,125 bytes per second. Wow! Hardly broadband, but hey. So to connect up the two machines that you want to transfer files between requires just a pair of MIDI cables. And these are connected in a ring, so MIDI out of computer A goes to MIDI in of computer B, and the MIDI out of computer B is connected to the MIDI in of computer A. All very easy. With MIDI as our chosen hardware platform, we're going to need some software to enable transfers. Now, there were several software solutions back in the day: BigNet, SmallNet, DriveNet, and Duet. I tried DriveNet and Duet while researching this video, and DriveNet was just too unstable for me, so I went with Duet. But DriveNet, however, has some capabilities that would be great to get working, like remote control of another ST, which is kind of like a poor man's VNC at glacial speeds, but nonetheless very impressive. And as a note, none of these solutions appear to like multitasking and are very timing sensitive. I tried them under Magic and Geneva to no avail. I mentioned earlier that we have some more esoteric solutions to transferring files, and I have a net USB device that can put the ST on an Ethernet LAN. And we'll be trying that out in a future video, but it is more complex to configure than this. Now, Duet is very flexible in its operation. It can transfer data over both MIDI and serial depending on your needs. And it comes in two parts. There's a driver and a configuration tool. Now, installing Duet is a simple process of copying those two apps and the config file into your auto folder. Editing the config file, you decide what local drives you want to publish. Then you set the execution order just to make sure that the driver is loaded before the config app, and we'll do that via Xboot. And you determine what type of hardware you're going to be using via the driver. So our driver is going to be duetmidi.prg because we're going over MIDI. Now, there are other drivers here for Atari serial, third-party serial systems via the cartridge port, the Falcon's LAN port, and specific drivers for both the TT and Falcons. None of this needs bother us. So let's look at the config file. The line state 0 mounts all of the drives as read-only. Now, because the file system can be accessed both by a remote machine and a local machine, what would happen if both decided to update the file system at the same time is both not necessarily known and probably is very, very dangerous. Corrupting your fat tables and stuff would just be so easy doing this. So we are absolutely running with read-only. The other line we're interested in is the line drive space N space C, which says create a local drive N and mount the remote drive C on that drive. Multiple drives are supported. Multiple drives are supported, but when I tried this out, I got strange results. So I added the line drive space M space D, expecting to see both the C drive and the D drive from the other machine as drives M and N, which I kind of did, but the drive letters were swapped. So C was on M and D was on N. So I was rather worried that things might get corrupted or confused. So I just stuck with one drive, which is enough for now. With all that set up, let's boot our TOS Duet X-Boot set on both computers. Now, I'll pause this as we boot through, but you can see the two parts of Duet loading. That's the driver and the config file. And then when we boot onto the desktop, we see, well, nothing really, no new drives, which was kind of a surprise to me. So the options on the desktop for adding additional devices and drives is not enabled. Now, this confused me, so what I did was I loaded NeoDesk, and now when I install the desktop icon, I get the option to install all available drives, clicking that, returning to the desktop, and there we see our remote drive. So I don't know why TOS didn't allow me to do this. Might be my version of TOS is too old. I think it's 1.6.5. I'm not 100% sure on these physical machines. But NeoDesk gives us access to the folders, and that's what we want at the end of the day. So let's copy our MIDI maze files over to our ST. So the process is simple drag and drop, just like any hard drive operation that you would do locally. And while it's not fast, it works. I'm not going to speed the transfer up, as that would really give a false impression, and I'm definitely not going to show the whole thing, because it took, well, quite a lot of time. What I did was time the transfer over MIDI, then I timed the same file copy on a local drive to a different folder. And the results were that the MIDI copy took 185 seconds, and the local copy took 25 seconds. So MIDI is 7.5 times slower than local file transfer speeds. But I'm going to call that pretty reasonable, really. I mean, when you compare it to the time it would take to copy the files to a floppy, wander over to your mate's ST, copy them onto his machine, probably not much different. I mean, not that this is really a realistic scenario. Nobody seemed to carry their hard drives to a LAN party back then. If you were playing MIDI maze, you'd just end up with a stack of floppy disks with the software on them, and you just distribute them out. But it's useful for general file transfer. Now, I mentioned we were mounting our remote drives read-only, so let's see what happens if we try to copy a file into a folder on the remote machine. And it says, no way, Jose, which is good. Okay, so now to start MIDI maze, which can support up to 16 players. I mean, there we go, isn't life grand? Now, if there was only someone in this house to actually play this against me, I'd be a happy boy. But there isn't. And I think I might have just over-ordered the wine for the LAN party. But never mind, that's a nice problem to have. Now, you might be asking if it's possible to run multiple copies of Atari on a machine and hook them up via MIDI. Then you could play MIDI maze locally. Or perhaps you want to connect two different Atari instances on your local area network for a true LAN party experience. And the short answer to this is yes, you can. But now it requires a build of Atari without port MIDI. So this allows us to access the raw MIDI device. Now, the standard builds of Atari for the Mac have port MIDI built in, so you'd have to do a bespoke build of Atari. And then you need to use a tool called SOCAT to actually form the bridge between the two instances. Now, this is beyond the scope of this episode, to be honest. But if a video about this will be of interest to you guys, just let me know in the comment. And if there's enough interest, I'll make one. And finally, a little plug for an event that's coming up. Cyber Legends 2 is happening on the 8th of October 2023. Which at the time of recording this is next Sunday, so I have not given this enough time. I did mean to do this a few weeks ago, but then I had a vacation and I haven't had a video out since. So Cyber Legends is occurring in the Western Favel Parish Hall, which is near Northampton. And it looks to be a belter, to be honest. So sorry for the very short notice. There's a link to the event page in the description to Exxos' forums, and I'm going to try and get my lazy self out of bed next Sunday and try to get there. However, that's all for now. Thanks for watching, and I will talk to you soon.